Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity hosted by the Maine Department of Education. My name is Joe Schmidt, and I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the state. Today, I'm happy to welcome one of my former colleagues in Madison, Wisconsin, Dave Olson. He is the chair of the Social Studies Department at Madison Memorial High School in Madison, Wisconsin. He also serves on the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies State Board. He is a member of the Constitution Center Teacher Advisory Board and also serves as a PBS digital innovator. And last but not least, I saved this one for last, I went out of order on my list here, but Dave is also a member of the iCivics Educator Network that I'm sure you've heard me talk about in so many different terms. So Dave and I had a great relationship back in Madison. We were just talking about that through the years. And I was able to persuade him. Some of the things I was like, Dave, you should join this. And some of the things Dave is awesome and he found on his own. But I was happy that Dave reached out and said he was willing to kind of talk about some current events and how to integrate that in your classroom. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Olson, Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. So I'm sharing my screen now. If you want to, oh no, I need the thing back up. If you want to join on Pear Deck, here's what you should do with a separate device, or you could also go split screen on them as well. That's totally doable. You're going to go to the website joinpd.com, and then when prompted, you're going to enter that 5-letter code, JZOSP. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Just a little bit of background. Like I said before we started recording, I had the pleasure of working with Joe for a handful of years when he served as the social studies lead in the Madison Metropolitan School District. I have the utmost respect for Joe. He's a fantastic guy, does really great work as a champion for social studies. I do give him credit for at least some of those things that I'm involved with. I think if not for Joe, I would not be part of the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. He's really somebody who got me roped in there. I did find the iCivics Educator Network on my own, but then I quickly discovered that Joe had been in it since the beginning, so we were able to bond over that. So as you're getting in here today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm hoping you can tell me some things about you, and then our goal here is really to figure out what are some ways that we can incorporate current events into your classroom on a regular basis and use current events as a lens to be able to analyze the history, the sociology, the geography, the economics, or whatever else you're looking at in your social studies classroom through some different activities, through some projects, through things like that. Is there anybody at this point, I see we've got 9 in there, is there anybody who's still working on getting in? And Joe, you might have to tell me. Looks like Kristen is raising her hand. So Kristen, do you need assistance, or she's giving me the 1-minute sign. Excellent. Okay. So again, joinpd.com, and actually this 5-digit code will remain in the upper corner of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So here we go. This is all the news that's fit to teach. And one of the things you'll notice here, I do have the bit.ly at the bottom that will get you to this presentation. I think Joe is also going to go and make a PDF of this and have it so that you can either go back to it, or if you found this presentation really interesting and you're like, I have colleagues that need to hear this, you can go send them Joe's way and they can access this presentation there. So who am I? I am David Olson. As Joe said, I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I've lived here for the last, this will be the beginning of my 14th year coming up here real soon. I teach at James Madison Memorial High School. It's one of 4 large, comprehensive public high schools in the city. I actually just finished my 10th year at Madison Memorial. I teach a number of different things. So every year I teach AP Government and a Criminal Justice elective course that I created, I think, almost 10 years ago now. And then depending on the year, I have often taught modern U.S. history. I've taught a class called U.S. and World Affairs, Ethnic Studies, World History. I'm also the department chair. And actually, I think part of the reason I've taught so many of those things is because I'm the department chair. So if, you know, as I'm creating the schedule, if there's like one class still hanging out there that needs to be taught, oftentimes I'll go, okay, I'll take it and I'll do it. So that's me. So why on earth should you bother to listen to me? Do I have any credibility? I hope so. So Joe gave you a little bit of my background. I've been part of the iCivics Educator Network. If you don't know what iCivics is yet, in your talks with Joe, go check it out. They have amazing curricular resources and then almost 20 games, which are fantastic for the teaching of government and even some American history. I'm on the teacher advisory board for the National Constitution Center. So it's an organization that exists as a museum in Philadelphia and then does all sorts of fantastic outreach about the teaching of the Constitution. I actually have a call with them later today discussing, they have a curriculum where they involve young people, high school students in the training of law enforcement. Where they bring law enforcement and a diverse group of high school students together to talk about constitutional issues, to talk about the effects on policing on their communities. So they do really outstanding work. I'm also a PBS digital innovator, which I'm not sure what exactly that means, but I do some work with PBS. In the past 6 months or so, I've had amazing opportunities. I've been able to interview Henry Louis Gates Jr., Ken Burns, Stanley Nelson. I've interviewed Lynn Novick. I've interviewed Karen Korematsu to be able to put out materials to help teachers incorporate totally free PBS resources into their teaching. So PBS does fantastic work. And I'm honored to be able to work with them. I'm one of the vice presidents for the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. And then I actually have 2 new ones that I've just found out about in the last couple weeks. PBS NewsHour Extra is starting a teacher advisory board or council, and I'm going to do some work with them. So PBS NewsHour, the hour-long news show on PBS every evening, has like an education branch. So there's a wonderful website, PBS NewsHour Extra, which has fantastic clips, lesson plans, like guiding questions for those news clips almost daily. So really, really good stuff from PBS NewsHour Extra. And then actually, just as we were sitting here, I got another follow-up email from the National Humanities Center. So I'm going to serve this next year as part of their board, teacher board, to spread the resources of the National Humanities Center to integrate, you know, social studies and the arts and literature and those sorts of things. So this is what I do. I love my teaching job, and then I go find other things that I'm passionate about to try to help teachers. So hopefully that's the goal for today, and we can figure that out. So here, this is your first interactive slide. So what you're going to do when you put your finger on there, you're going to drag your dot. I'm guessing that most of you people are in Maine. If you're not currently in Maine, go ahead and use the US map. If you are currently in Maine, put your dot on the state. Tell me where you are from in Maine. I know it's a little funky. And if you're trying to do it on the presentation that you're seeing through the screen share, it won't work. You got to have the device to do it. And this is, if you've never used Pear Deck before, it's a program that's like a freemium model. There's a free version with quite a few different tools, and then a whole bunch more tools if you go with the paid version. This is one of the very few things that my school district actually pays for, and it's really cool, and I really like it. So this is one of my favorites, the drag a dot part. So here what I'm going to do is show the responses. So now it will show you should be seeing all of the student responses. And if you go and you move yours right now, you should be able to see it move. And I have the ability on my end to lock it. So usually the first time I do this, I open it up, I don't lock it. Students are moving their stuff all over the place. They think it's really hilarious. And then I give them the countdown of, okay, I'm going to lock it. And then we're going to see where we are. So So wonderful. What looks like you guys are sort of spread out here in Maine. Anyone want to give me a shout out as to what cities these are? Because I'm not going to lie to you. I think I know like 4 cities in the entire state of Maine. So where are you from? Unmute yourself. Pauline, you unmuted yourself. What do you got?
I'm from Poland.
Okay. And whereabouts in the state is that?
Just west of Auburn, about
Okay.
40 minutes north of Portland.
Okay. This is an odd question. Is there a state prison in Auburn?
At the courthouse, they have cells. That's all I know. Not familiar with that system.
Okay. There's a documentary I use that looks at the prison system in Maine, and I thought it was Auburn, but I could be incorrect. So, so it looks like Freeport. So is it Gloucester? New Gloucester, or do you pronounce it Gloucester? You help me here. Saying yes. I gave you both options, Kristen. That doesn't help me. No. New Gloucester, I'm guessing.
I was saying yes when you said New Gloucester. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Okay, there we go. Oh, Auburn, New York. Yeah, there. Yes, Joe, you're correct. That is the Auburn prison I'm thinking of. I'll have to figure out which prison in Maine is on that. Ooh, Sandy Point, west of Penobscot Bay. Okay, that I know where that is. I know where Acadia National Park is. Awesome. All right. So fantastic. So let's, I'm going to hide responses here. We'll go to the next one. So now you tell me what you teach. So you should have the ability to type in your response. So this is a text response slide. And one of the things you'll notice here when I display these answers, I have a split screen over here. I can see who has written what. I can also see all of the responses ahead of time. So if you're using this in the classroom and you're using, your teacher device over that the students can't see, this way I can hide any responses that aren't really suitable. And I can see who has written what, but when I display it for everyone to see, the names will not be connected. So I use this, for multiple choice responses, for quick short answer responses. I mean, it's really good because it's anonymized when it comes back to the students. So where do you type it? Got it. Lost audio. Okay, so I'm gonna show some of these responses and we'll see what we got. Looks like we have a science and math person who teaches middle school. So what I can tell you is a lot of this presentation, especially on the science end, will be really helpful. Math, especially if you're incorporating any statistics, probability, that sort of thing, that's a great place to work in the real world application of math with current events. So 7th grade social studies and language arts, social studies, reading, writing, the humanities. So tell me, what does 6th, 7th, and 8th grade social studies look like in the state of Maine?
Am I supposed to write that down?
You can say it to me out loud or write it down. Either one. I know I have too many ways for people to participate here.
Focus on primary documents.
Okay. Oh, and Joe is telling me there is no statewide scope and sequence. Oh, another one of those states. Wisconsin's the same way. Okay, so we have potentially all sorts of stuff. Okay, well, we'll keep going here. So our essential goals for today. Ancient Civ, very good. So our goals for today are to develop an understanding of why we would use current events in the classroom, to look at some examples of news literacy, and to figure out some ways to incorporate current events. And I sort of break this up into how do I do this on a daily basis? How do I make it so it's a regular but quick check-in part of my schedule, and how do I do it in a way that's more purposeful and tied to maybe a summative assessment that's more project-based. So early US Maine history, excellent. So here's another way for you to participate. This one, you're gonna drag a bar from side to side. So you're gonna tell me how you agree here. Current events are an essential part of my classroom. And actually this one, I can't tell whose bar is whose. So, no shame, no hiding, or well, you are hiding from me on this one. All right, so here's where we are so far on this one. Okay, so it looks like some people who say, yeah, it definitely is. How about this? I stay up to date on the news myself. There we go. We got somebody going off the chart here. So here's where we are on this one. How about, I feel like I can easily find resources for news to share with my students. Okay. So a little more spread on this one, and that's great because I think part of what I'm hoping to do today is point you in the right direction of some resources here. All right, and then the rationale for why I make current events part of my classroom on a regular basis is that I strongly believe that students need to be consumers of news. I see it as my job as an educator, especially as a social studies teacher, to make sure that my students are well informed, that they are ready to participate in civic life, and that they have an understanding of different kinds of people, different kinds of ways of thinking, and those things are best manifested in what is happening in their immediate world, the country, and the entire world around them. I also strongly believe that students need to be good consumers of news. So they need to have some skills to be able to discern what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're listening to be able to discern, can I trust a news source? Is there something here that's misleading? Is there bias? What are the different ways I'm being pulled or manipulated by this news source? I think that current events should happen every day or almost every day. I will admit, on test days, or if we have some, big important thing happening where we need all 53 minutes of class, there are some days where I go, oh man, we can't do news today. We'll get back to it tomorrow. But pretty much every day, I start my classes by asking the very same question. I ask, what's going on in the world? What do we need to know? And that becomes the way we start every single class, so students know to expect it. I also strongly believe that news can, should, and will connect to your content if you let it. I cannot tell you how many times we have looked at, here's what's happening in the world, and then lo and behold, we come across something in the curriculum that ties almost directly to the very thing that's occurring. I really, this last couple months, I think, we probably ended in Wisconsin, similar time to when you guys left the classroom in Maine. I think our last day was Friday the 13th of March. And I can't tell you how frustrated it is to not be in front of students every day, especially in my AP government class, thinking about like what are all of the things we could have been looking at to reinforce those ideas of what is the role of government? What is federalism? How do the national government and the state governments sort of grapple for power and have this argument with each other about who's responsible for things? It's like that is absolutely what has happened. We are living the concepts of our curriculum here. So try to integrate current events within the context. There are times you throw out the context due to the current event. Absolutely, Faith. That's you're 100% on. Okay. And I also firmly believe that students will make better connections to history and all of the social studies if they can see it in their world. You know, I think about the math teacher, the person who said they teach science and math here. My guess is more than once, especially in math, you've heard a student say, when am I going to use this? How does this connect? And for me, social studies, that's all it is, right? Social studies is understanding our world, what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and what might happen in the future, and how all of these human beings interact with each other. Those are the things that make studying social studies worthwhile. So that has to be something you practice on a regular basis in your classroom. So we're going to talk a little bit about incorporating the news and how to make this a daily practice in your classroom. So as I said before, I start almost every class by asking, what's going on in the world? What do we need to know? This is my standard line from day one. And here's what I'll say. Sometimes it takes a few weeks for students to become active participants, but I have yet to have a class where that doesn't happen. Okay, so consistency here is the key. So I ask this question every single day. I take hands, and often I have to say, like, okay, we do actually need to move on. We're gonna, you know, we're only gonna take 3 or 4 more current events or things in the news that we're discussing. Students generally like this. Obviously, you'll have kids who want to be the first to share every single day and want to dominate the conversation, that you have to, you know, use those classroom management skills to make sure they share the air. You're also going to have students who just are totally reticent, who go, I don't know, I don't want to participate. And this is one of those places where that's okay. But this is where you have that sort of relationship building and gentle one-on-one going, hey, you know, this is something I know you're paying attention to. Or when they come in, I have so many students who come in and go, Mr. Olson, did you see this thing happen? And I'll go, yeah, I'm going to call on you and you're going to tell us about it. Okay. So being able to make that connection to help them share, I think is really important. So how long do you spend? I would say every day it's at least 5 minutes. If there's big stuff in the news, my thought process here is this is important, and this in the long run will yield benefits. So I do often have to stop. So I would say most days no more than 10 minutes, but I will also say I had a class, I think it was in October, November this year in my AP government course, where we ended up throwing the day's lesson out the window. I had to come back to it the next day because we needed to discuss something in the news. So the issue was the Madison Metropolitan School District was facing a potential lawsuit from a conservative organization that, I'll give you the real quick rundown here because you're like, I don't care about this. This was in Madison, Wisconsin. Essentially, if you had a student who was identifying as a different gender at school, that the school was not disclosing that to the parents, okay? And this legal group was threatening to sue and ultimately did sue the school district to mandate that the school share that information with parents as soon as the school knew. So basically, if a kid says, hey, I'm going to go by different pronouns, I'd like to be called this other name in class, the lawsuit was trying to create a policy that the school mandated that the school had to inform the parents that this was occurring at the school. Okay, and shockingly, students had really strong opinions about this. So this was something we needed to talk about, that students had questions, students had comments, and it was one of those days where I went, we are living social studies in the moment. It is more important to have this discussion than to move on and, you know, discuss whatever we were going to discuss that day. Okay. Yes, CNN 10, I like, especially I think for middle school. I think it's great. I've used it at the high school level. So full disclosure here, I've spent the last 10 years at the high school level. I did some teaching at the college level, and I started my career at the middle school level. I think I'm most at home at the high school level. I think CNN 10 is really good. Personally, if I were teaching middle school, if I was teaching a current events class, I probably would use CNN 10 every day. If I was teaching something else, I think I would look and see, is there stuff on CNN 10 that I thought was really important? I would go with that, but I would still ask students to bring things to class that they have seen that they want to share, okay? Because part of this is the discussion that you're gonna have, the questions that are raised, where you can work as the teacher to dispel myths, to explain things, and then most importantly, connect it to the things that you're learning about in your classroom. That's where the real opportunities come in my perspective, okay? And sometimes you need to prime the pump. And this is where something like CNN 10 might come in, right? What I do is, so in my classroom, I'm fortunate enough, I have a big TV that also happens to be a touch screen that every day when students come in, I have either a news story that I think is relevant, or like the homepage of the Washington Post, or the homepage of the Wisconsin State Journal, or something like that, that is up, so students can quickly scan that and go, oh, this is a thing I've heard about, or this is, or, you know, I have questions about what this is. So someone asked in the chat, what is CNN 10? CNN 10 is a 10-minute long short news broadcast, I think really aimed towards upper elementary, middle school age students. It is free to watch. It's a video that gets put out every day. If you just Google CNN 10, you can find it. I don't think they run in the summer. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But during the school year, it's a Monday through Friday, every day out by, I don't know, 7, 8 in the morning Eastern, ready to use. And if you really are struggling to have students participate, and really, I think the magic of this is having the students participate, you might need to assign it, sort of, or challenge students and say, come on, you know, tomorrow I need at least 3 current events that you guys want to talk about, or going up to a student who, you know, sort of participates but not really, and go, hey, where do you get your news from? What is it on your phone? Because trust me, that's where they're probably getting their news. Go, what news apps do you have on your phone? You can even tell students to go, hey, I see you have the New York Times, or I don't know, you tell me the name of a prominent newspaper in the state of Maine, the Portland Tribune, I don't know what you got, and go, turn on the notifications. When there's a big news story, you'll get a notification on your phone that tells you, you know, here's what you need to know. The Bangor Daily News, there you go. So put those news apps on your phone. Have a place where you can go that you trust to go get some information. So sometimes I do have them write about it. I'm actually going to discuss a couple strategies for that, couple ways I've used it here. So to make it a daily occurrence, I'm going to show you some of the places that I go and I have ready for students to use here. So The first is, I think you got to have a place for local news. So here in Madison, Wisconsin, my favorite is the CBS affiliate Channel 3, or their website, Channel 3000. So this one, I actually think, does a better job than our local paper of sort of updating news that's happening in real time. So that's something that you need to judge based on what your local news sources are. What website is gonna actually update during the day and have stuff that, you know, because I can't tell you how many times what we talk about in the 11 o'clock class is totally different than the 10 o'clock class because of something that happened at 10:30. You know, the president sent out a tweet at 10:15 that, you know, caused ripples across the country. Well, I got to have a place I can go to in the moment to figure that out. National, personally, I use the Washington Post, mostly because it's something I have a subscription for. So find a good national source that you trust. One of the things I like about the Washington Post is it does update pretty quickly. And then this in the news bar right here, where they have like keywords or things that have been searched or sort of breaking news stories. This is something that oftentimes students will come in and go, what is that thing about? Okay, they'll see this and go, Aunt Jemima, what is that news story? And they want to know. And then I can go up to the board and click on it, and we can see what is it that's in the news that's important for us to know. The years where I've taught a class called U.S. and World Affairs, which essentially is a world current events class. The place I went to most often was BBC News. I needed something English language because I'm a dumb American and that's all I speak. So I needed something English news. I needed something that covered world news well. BBC was the best resource for that. So, you know, this, and I took some of these screenshots yesterday, so you can see like India and China exchanged protests over clashes. That's a big deal news story that wasn't on, you know, the header of the Washington Post. So, you know, understanding, you know, if you're teaching ancient civilizations, where you can go, let's figure out what's happening in those places today. If you're teaching world history, you got to have a good world news source. So what about bias of sources? Great question, Pauline. What I would say, there's a great website called Allsides. I think it's .com, might be .org. Joe can figure that out for us. So Allsides, one word, .com. They have a ranking, and it's on two different axes. Talks about you know, left and right spectrum, liberal versus conservative news. There you go, allsides.com. Look at that, unbiased and balanced news. So there, it'll give you sort of an evaluation of what sort of bias you might be seeing. And then there's also, I think the other access on that one looks at like, is this more news? Is this more opinion-based? That sort of thing. What do you think of ad fonts? I don't know what that is. So Jessica, if you'd like to chime in and tell us, that would be awesome. Otherwise, I'll have to, a media chart. Okay, I will have to find that one. It's not one I'm familiar with, but I usually try to find things that are in the middle. There you go, adfontsmedia.com. Excellent. I also, part of what we need to do and teach students is what sort of things are we looking for? What sort of language might be different? And that's one of the great things about allsides.com is often they will take a big important story and they will find links to articles from different news sources across the political spectrum where you can go and read about the same event and look at how the reporting is different. And that is a great strategy as you're teaching students how to evaluate sources to go, well, let's look at this. What is the difference between how this was reported on the Fox News website and how this was reported on the MSNBC website, right? That's a powerful skill to be able to teach students and go, what is the language that's used that shows us there's a different take on this event? You can also follow Allsides on Twitter, and they'll put out there like, hey, here's what the headline read for this source, and this source is center, or this source is left-leaning, that sort of thing. So there are great resources out there. Okay. I also, you know, I teach similar students to you guys. I think video is incredibly important. So CNN 10, great resource. The resources I go to most often, because I want shorter clips, often about one story, is PBS NewsHour Extra. And like I said, this is a site that not only has those short segment clips from PBS NewsHour, but they often have discussion questions that go with them. And then my news of choice is I like the NBC Nightly News. I really like their website because, I don't know if you could see from this screenshot, along the side, what they do is they take each of the little segments and stories, most of which are between like 2 and 4 minutes long, and you can click and watch just that segment. And to me, that's really important. So usually in the morning, and it's the only bad thing is it's from the night before, right? So I come into class on a Tuesday morning, I pull up the NBC Nightly News site. It shows me, here are all the different segments that were on the NBC Nightly News on Monday evening. And then I go, okay, which of these might fit what we've been talking about or I think is really important? And this is something that I can then quick show my students, and we're in and out in 3 minutes on that news story. So those are the places I go to make this a daily thing. So you tell me, this is a chance for you to type it in here. You could also put it in the chat if you didn't want to put it in on Pear Deck. What has worked for you? All of you are in Maine, so especially if you have great places for Maine news or regional New England news that you've gone to, what are those places that you've made use of in your classroom that the other educators with us today want to know about? Looks like we're getting some good responses here. So I'm going to put this out. It looks like a number of people have said Newsela. Newsela is not something I've used because, well, I guess I've used it a few times. Is Newsela still, it's a paid program, correct? Or do they have are there free options with Newsela? This is where you'll have to tell me because I don't know. To be honest, been avoiding the news lately. I hear you. That's you're not alone. You pay for the quizzes and the writing prompts. Okay, so I'm guessing like you can get the articles and the information without paying, but if you want the other stuff that goes with it, the educational resources to take it one more step, you got to pay for it. Okay, free version with the articles, excellent. So with 3rd and 4th graders, we've discussed news as topics organically come up in conversation. Like to incorporate it with our social studies and ELA work, but need to have appropriate resources. Yeah, that can be difficult. I feel like there are, oh, I'm sorry that Pear Deck is quitting on you. I feel like there are some websites that will, I might have to figure out what this is, that will take a news source and you can request it in a different Lexile level and it'll go through and make the changes. I swear that's a real thing, but I can't remember what the name of that is. So let's see what else we got. Portland Press Herald. So a good affiliate here, the NBC affiliate with news in Maine.
Dave, I can chime in really quick. I think the one that you're talking about is Rewordify.
Okay.
And that was, I did that webinar back, I think it's the first one we did back in March. So if you want to check, we walked through Newsela, Tween Tribune from the Smithsonian, which has different levels of reading. And then I show you how to use Rewordify to both rewordify text and then how it spits out the flashcards, the quizzes and stuff like that as well.
Okay. So yeah, so there are resources if you're going to take something from a different news website that you're like, man, I need a third grader to be able to read this, where you can try to change that lexile. One other thing here for the super user, if you want to make current events a feature part of your classroom, this is something that I used when I taught the U.S. and World Affairs class. It's called Fan School. This is essentially a fantasy current events program that you can use with students. There is a free version of this, especially if you're doing it with like one class. But if you're a middle school teacher and trying to do this across 4 sections, then you're going to need the paid version here. But essentially, students would draft countries, or you can do a states version, or they now have a members of Congress, and I think there's actually a new version that is science-based. But essentially what happens here, I've done the world one. So where students went through and they drafted individual countries, and then they get points for those countries on a weekly basis based on mentions. I think their basis was like New York Times mentions. And then there was like a boost for positive news coverage. So like if I chose a country where, you know, there was civil war and famine and that sort of thing, you get points for it. But if it was a country that was in the news for positive things, you get a boost for that. And these are all things that you can make adjustments to. But Fan School is a really cool way to do this and have students really get invested. And so for a current events kind of class, for a world history kind of class, or for a U.S. history using like the states version, that would be great. For a government class, using the members of Congress version would be very good as well. So here, I just put some things that I have done with my students around Fan School. So essentially my students prepared for a draft. So they had to develop scouting reports on different countries where they looked at, okay, what kind of government does this country have? What sort of things have they been in the news for? Are there key events that are coming up on the calendar? So they could come up with their big board where they go, okay, here's my scouting reports of these countries and where I think they might fall or how they might earn me points. And then on a weekly basis, I had students go and figure out what country was your high scorer for the week, find an important news story from the previous week that involved that country, tell me what it was about. And then go look at your roster. Are there countries that you're going to pick up? Are there countries that you're going to try to trade for with the other students in the class? And really make this a game-based current event system. So this is the only paid thing that I'm pitching you today. All of the other things I'm talking about here are totally free, the lesson plans and things like that. But this is a cool resource that I've used. All right. So the other thing we need to do is try to teach some information literacy. It is my view that this is a skill that absolutely can be learned. We talked about some of those resources like allsides.com. In the teaching of news literacy, some great places that I've been would be the Stanford History Education Group. They have a really good set of lesson plans to teach news literacy. So here's a screenshot of one. This shortened URL will bring you to the whole document where they have the lesson plans, handouts. They also have a rationale of that basically says our students are really terrible at evaluating news sources. So here are some things we can do to help that. I also really like this resource from the Newseum, which, if you don't know, the Newseum in Washington, D.C. actually closed. They are looking for a new spot. I think they've transitioned to a different name for the time being. Joe might know what that is, but this will still get you, the Newseum Education Department has some really good stuff. They use an acronym called ESCAPE to be able to analyze a news source. So I have really liked the ESCAPE junk news formula for teaching students very systematically, here's what you need to look for and how you would go through evaluating sources. So some examples here. These are links to a couple different things that I created for my students to have them go through and evaluate different news stories. So here the escape one is you look for evidence, like who is cited, what are the facts in the story, are they like bringing in real people to talk about this, what is the source, the context, the audience, the purpose, and the execution. So is it written clearly? Are there grammatical errors? All of these things for how are you going to evaluate that news source. So yes, Newseum, so they are still online. On Twitter, I know they changed to something else, Freedom Forum or something like that. But yes, you can still find all of their educational resources, which are really good. Yep, Freedom Forum Institute, there we go. See, Joe's on top of this. So these are links to some things that I've created. Feel free to go in there and make a copy and make it your own. Okay, they're a branch of the Freedom Forum Institute. There you go. And I love iCivics stuff. iCivics has a game to teach these concepts. It's called Newsfeed Defenders. So this is a totally free game. It's going to take your students between half hour, 45 minutes to play. Essentially, it's going to teach them the skills to evaluate news. In the game, they are a moderator of a news and discussion board. So what happens is these different news stories come, and you as the moderator of this online community, you have to decide, is this something I want to push out to my subscribers, the people who come to this website? So I need to evaluate this for, is this a real story? Does it have good information? Is it trying to sell them something? All of those sorts of things. There you go. Newseum has online summer PD. So Newsfeed Defenders, really good game. So totally free for students to play. The link to it is right here. It does a really good job of sort of sneakily teaching students some of those news evaluation tools. All right. I'm gonna skip this part because I want to make sure you're out of here relatively soon. But if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat as we go. I'm going to talk about how I've turned some of these things into assessments or larger scale projects. So some simple assessments. Use it as like the end of a unit or a mini unit. And my goal here is often to make an explicit connection between the history that we've been studying and current events. Okay, good to go to 12:20. Okay, excellent. So some way, and really my goal here is to show students the history that we have been discussing is alive and well in our current context. That the history you've been learning did not happen in a vacuum. Its effect is not over today. It is happening now. So some ways that I've done that. So here's a screenshot of an assignment I've used for modern US history. So here, the unit was looking at the role of the government in people's lives. So here, our time frame for modern US history was essentially beginning of the Cold War, so post-World War II, 1960-ish to the present. And looking at, well, what are the different ways that we've looked at how the government is involved in people's lives? So we spent a lot of time learning about the Great Society. So anti-poverty campaigns and the creation of things like Medicare and Medicaid, and then looking at sort of the conservative backlash to that. What happened with the Reagan Revolution and Reaganomics, and then how has that developed until the point we're at today? And so one of the assignments here was for students to investigate two different issues. They started, and here's our wonderful statistics math connection. They went and looked at some Gallup polling on how have people felt about this issue between 1960s and 70s and today. How have people felt about the legalization of marijuana or attitudes towards immigration or gay marriage? Okay, and then we coupled that with some some different readings from different ends of the spectrum. So here, an article that argues against the legalization of marijuana, and an article that argues for the legalization of marijuana, or things like gun control or abortion. And then we had students say, and you can look at the whole assignment here with this link and go, well, how have attitudes towards this issue developed over time, the scope of our class? What are the different arguments that you got from the different ends of the political spectrum? And now you tell me what you think should be the answer. How should we go forward? And what should the government do about it? Should the government get out of our way? Should the government create new policies? All of these sorts of things. So here, my goal was to bring the history to our present moment and have students understand that the things we are living with right now, the decisions we are trying to make right now, these have been argued about for some time, and this is what's going to help us learn. All right. A few years ago, Newsela had a fake news packet which gave fake news examples through U.S. history. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. So you could check out Faith if you have the link for that, or perhaps Joe could find it. That sounds like a really cool resource here.
Right. And what was very good, if I may interject, was that the kids thought that fake news was only something that we've been dealing with in current history. And so then you kind of go with the past, the links, the changes, what we have now, awesome. And if you're all up in arms against fake news, what do you do? You know, and then we looked at things such as, you know, things like, well, Facebook is a private company. Can that, you know, how much government control do you want over that, or regulation over that, and so on and so forth. So that was, you know, for middle school students, that was timely. I was really
that's awesome.
The students do that. Yep.
Oh, that's fantastic. And somebody else in the chat mentioned Pew Research. They also have really good longitudinal polling where you can bring in that data piece. I think it's really important to teach students to be good consumers of that sort of information too. How do you read a poll? How, you know, what information can I actually pull out of there to make it useful to understand? And that's going to be an important skill between now and election day, of understanding how to read a poll. All right, that was my 2 cents here. So some other assessments here. I really think this focus on current events and the news can fit with most frameworks or essential questions. So another unit where we use this was looking at the role of the US government in the world. So again, this was from modern US history class. So it was looking at, well, what should the US do with Iran right now? Well, to understand that, we want to look at what was the history of the US and Iran, how we've interacted since the 1950s, and how can that inform the decisions we want to make today, okay? And this is something, oh, it looks like we're losing some people. So thank you for coming. So here, this is one of those things you gotta kind of stay up on, because you know, the hot spots of where the US is interacting with other countries around the world, that's going to change a little bit. And so here, you know, this one was about a year ago, where looked at US and Iran, US and Venezuela. Okay, what do we got here? Woo. Oh, please stay if you can. Okay, I will try to get to the highlights here and hit on important stuff. And then as a bigger project, this was one year what I used for my final in modern US history. I had students make a comparison. Yeah, this is looking so good right now. I'm looking like a genius, even though this was, you know, 2-3 years ago. Connect the year 1968 to today. Find something, and I gave them a list of, here are some events and important things that happened in 1968. Pick something political, social, economic. I had students who were comparing Vietnam era protest songs to Beyonce's latest album, which had come out at the time, which was talking about, she had a number of songs dealing with like women's empowerment and things like that. Here, my sample for them on ThingLink was athletes and activism. So here, this was right at the heart of the Colin Kaepernick protest during the national anthem against police violence and the 1968 Olympics. So here, the goal was, how can we take something from what we have looked at historically and make a connection to your world today? So if you haven't used ThingLink, this is another one where there's some free options and some non-free options. ThingLink, really cool. You put in basically these little markers that link to articles, text that you put in, video, all sorts of stuff. Another one for the US and World Affairs class I taught, I wanted them to apply their learning to a hypothetical situation. So we learned about our historical context with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula, and then their job was to conduct a situation room. So we had the president and vice president, we had a bunch of their cabinet members who all had to come give them a recommendation about here's what we should do with North Korea right now. So that's, again, one of the bigger projects. That was a end of unit kind of thing that we did. I also am of the opinion that current events can and should be fodder for discussions. And I know Joe has done some different webinars with these strategies. So Socratic seminars, structured academic controversies, or philosophical chairs. There's different schools of thought about each of these things and sort of the questions that you ought to grapple with each of these ways you would go about it. So a Socratic seminar, you want something a little more open-ended, where the discussion is meant to sort of come up with ideas and have a more holistic discussion. A structured academic controversy is where students may not know much about the background, and the goal is, how can I learn multiple sides of this issue and figure out what those pro-con arguments are. And then philosophical chairs is often more a quick and opinion-based idea, where activity where you have kids go, okay, in 5 minutes I can develop, here's what I want to say about this, and here's where my opinion comes from. So I gave you some sample questions here, very timely and in the news over the past year or so, that might fit with each of these. So that's what I got here. Instead of having you type in questions in Pear Deck, if you want to ask questions, or if you have an idea of, hey, here's something from my curriculum that I think would really fit well, connecting to current events, I would love to hear your ideas, and that way you're helping, share with your other fellow Maine educators. So how do you correct misinformation and disinformation? That is a great, great question, Jessica. So the way I try to do it is, number one, I try to stay up on the news myself and understand what are some of the controversial topics where misinformation might be a problem, so that I can go, oh, here's maybe another way to look at this, or knowing what resources we can go to. I also, on a regular basis, and again, I have technology in my room that I can do this really easily. When a student raises their hand and says, oh, I heard this thing, blah, 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 I often will go, awesome, let's find it. Okay, I open a new tab on the browser, I type it in, we go and look for a good, reliable news source, and we go and look at the article all together. Okay, there have been many, many times where students know half the story or know a biased explanation of the story, where I can go, without calling them out and saying, no, you're wrong, or having other students go, you're making stuff up, I can go, let's find it. And I model that skill of going, how can I learn more about this topic, so that I'm coming at this as an educator from a place of wanting to learn and showing students how to do that. So for me, that's how I try to correct that misinformation and disinformation. I show my students in that moment, let's find it and let's see what we can learn about this. What other questions do you have? Yeah, Pamela, you got to unmute yourself though.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, forgive me, I've been in my own little bubble for so long, sometimes it's hard for me to phrase questions. So I would really like to, especially in my district, the way that they've reacted politically to most current issues, I really feel like I need to present a very centrist approach. So I would like to be able to define quickly and pretty clearly for students what does the term liberal media mean, what does conservative media mean, and why would I want to try and find some centrist media to share with them.
So I would, okay, so let me back up a moment. I live and teach in Madison, Wisconsin. It is one of the most liberal places in the country. So one of the things that I'm often trying to do is helping students find another perspective, okay? I think that's important for me as an educator to go, the things you believe are great. You should believe them. You should especially believe them if you have evidence to back them up. There might be other people who disagree with you and think a different way. So I view it as my job as trying to have students see a bigger picture. So what I would do is make sure students understand the difference between liberal and conservative, and understand here are sort of those foundational beliefs about what being liberal is and what being conservative is. And I think that can be done with in a fair way and without judgment, okay? A difference of, you know, what is the role of the government in people's lives, and what are some of the ways that liberals or conservatives view things like, you know, what sort of laws should we make? What should we do economically to try to help the most people? Because I think there's, you know, liberals and conservatives both want people to be successful. They both want people to be safe and free. They just have slightly different conceptions about how to get there, and maybe more than slightly different conceptions. So your students need to understand what those beliefs are. And then I think you can find good sources and sources that are centrist. The problem is some communities might view centrist sources as being biased, right? I think the Washington Post is a good source, but there are conservative people and places in this country who go, no, that's a liberal rag, right? So what are ways you can show students, here's the same event, the same issue covered by different organizations, covered by different media. And it might take a little bit more time because you go, well, we got to look at this event from more than one media source. And that's where a place like allsides.com would be a really good resource for you, to go, let's look at how different media outlets are reporting on this one issue. What are the similarities and differences? Jessica says, a big problem is that many people distrust the news. So when you try to present them with accurate news, yeah, my thought about this is, if you go to news sources that source their information, that provide citations, provide context, and you do it over and over and over again, you model and show the process of here is how I go and find information, eventually people will come to either trust it or know, like, here are some strategies for how I can tell if I'm going to trust it. It's a problem. It's one of those problems that I think modeling, practice, and consistency can overcome. I think that education can help people be good consumers of news. I am not of the opinion that our blanket statement, our news media is biased and isn't telling us the truth. I think there is some news out there, both liberal and conservative, which is trying to convince you of something at times. But I think on the whole, journalists are trying to to help people understand. So what about factcheck.org or Politico or other fact checkers? Yes, I think those are good places. Now, there are definitely people who will go, no, fact check is biased, or Snopes is biased. And my thought is, let's do this consistently and go check our sources and model this practice for students. And I feel like eventually they'll learn, like, here are the skills that I need in order to figure out what news I want to trust and don't. You're probably not going to convince every kid to abandon, oftentimes their family's view that the news is out to lie to them, and that the only source of truth is a politician on one particular side or the other. But you can try. Most you can do is try.
Thank you.
What other questions do you have? All right. So I had a lot of fun. That was good. I hope you came away from this presentation with some concrete ideas about how to utilize news and current events, both on a daily basis, as well as some ideas for what kind of projects or assignments you might create to sort of help students bridge that connection between your everyday content and what's happening in the world around them. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. You can follow me on Twitter and send me a message there. I'm more than happy to answer any other questions. I'm more than happy to share with you things that I've created, used, and worked on. But Joe, thank you for the opportunity to present to the great teachers of Maine.
And to think, Dave, when I first asked you about it, you're like, well, I don't think I can fill an hour. And look at you, like, it was amazing. You were having to rush at the end.
I know.
Does
I'm
any
very verbose.
Anybody have any last second questions for Dave while we're still recording?
They're all saving their questions for when the recording turns off.
That's absolutely correct. So I'm going to go ahead and give a formal thank you on the recording, David. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time and expertise.